he's using this as, a launching place for saying, my mission has not changed. My individual circumstances have changed, but the mission has not. No matter what happens, no matter what circumstances I'm placed in, I will continue the mission. And he's saying, this is your job too. I've given you a task to do in Ephesus. But Timothy's main job is not to be an evangelist. His job is to organize fellowships and appoint leaders and then guide those leaders as they start to do the same thing themselves. Eventually the job of every elder in a congregation is to train up the next generation of elders. And I don't mean the next 20 years younger generation. I mean the next 20 months later generation, so that they can go and do the same thing. So, a constant multiplication of fellowships. His job throughout is to make sure that these elders continue to progress, that they're being discipled and learning and staying within the bounds that Paul has laid out for them, because there's always distractions. There are always things that pull us away. We've got politics and work and family and all of these things, and they're all important. None of these things are unimportant. But if you're on a mission, you can't allow these things to distract you from your mission, except maybe temporarily. You got to go fix something, and you can't let your family fall apart because you've got a ministry, because your family comes first. Paul reminds Timothy that he can't let all of these petty arguments and distractions, things that people get caught up in, take these fellowships off into the weeds. And he specifically calls out things that people argue about, irreverent babble, and ungodliness, and
what was the other one? Words.
Arguments over words, foolish, ignorant controversies. And elsewhere he talked about endless genealogies. I think that was in the first letter. And these are things that we see in the Torah movement all the time. People arguing over the genealogies. We're talking about the timeline and who was alive at what time. Who is Shem? What's his real identity? Melchizedek, is he really a pre-incarnate Jesus? Or is this Shem? Or is this somebody else? Honestly, who really cares? It's not the point. We can get caught up in arguing these things all day long, and any of these views might have its merits, but they're all a tangent. The really important thing about Melchizedek is the pattern that he sets of the priest king who has no explicit origins, no explicit genealogy, who appears and then disappears, and Abraham is submitted to him. That's the important part, not was he Shem or was he somebody else.
I get to prove who he is.
Right.
Because I know, because I read somewhere.
Things that we tend to get caught up in, not just the Torah movement, the pronouncing the name, all kinds of things that might or might not be hinted at in Scripture, because there are all kinds of things that Scripture alludes to, but doesn't spell out. And so if it doesn't spell it out, we need to be very careful with demanding that everybody else fall in line with our ideas, with our interpretations. Some things like
is it profitable for godliness? I think that should be.
Yeah. How does it change what you do? Mm-hmm. Does it change how you relate to other people? Does it affect how you relate to God and how you live out your life on a day-to-day basis? These are the things that matter the most.
And also community fellowship. So there could be disagreements about calendar and some of those might be just a matter of one person sees it this way, but they could both be interpreted by Scripture in that way. And it's just as a community, do your best, and then don't meet on the same holiday.
And that's where we get to the letter to the Ephesians. This is a letter to Timothy. The letter to the Ephesians was a letter to the same congregation that Timothy is trying to manage. And Paul says, he talks about mutual submission at one point. He's talking about family dynamics and, wives, be submitted to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And all of you be submitted to one another. And that's the kind of thing, talking about calendars and how do you pronounce the name? Well, obviously, some of us have different ways that we pronounce the name of the Father or the name of the Son. And I've never heard anybody argue about it in, 13 years of meeting. And that's great.
You mean
Yeah, it's amazing.
in our meetings?
In our meetings.
Yes. that is
Nobody has
correct.
ever argued about that.
Yeah, because we're to focus on sound doctrine, which is unifying,
Hmm.
not divisive doctrines
Yeah.
that we bring in.
Especially when it comes to, this is not something that you can read and say, this is,
for
it could,
certainty.
it could go either way, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still based in scripture, then why quarrel about that?
Yeah. And the calendar is one where it does affect how you live, but that's another one where I think we've done a really good job, is that we have people in our fellowship who have different opinions about how we're supposed to calculate the feasts in the beginning of the month.
Mhm.
And we've talked about it. We've had discussions through Signal and in person. We've never had an argument about it. Nobody has ever walked away with ill will because we are mutually submitted. We've all agreed. I don't believe that's how it's supposed to be done, but as a group, this is a reasonable opinion, even if I disagree with it. So let's just go along with that for now. And we'll let Yeshua fix it when he comes back.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, and it goes back to, like, being God's children, being part of the family of God. It's like, okay, so one day somebody's going to come back and explain to us exactly how we've been doing it wrong or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's for the sake of being family. We're going to choose this thing that's reasonable and all do the same thing as it pertains to when we meet with the Father at his appointed times. And
Because the
Mhm.
ultimate goal is that
Yeah.
we meet
yeah,
and celebrate.
and so it becomes like we're going to be family in the way that God calls us to be family. Just like if you have a family reunion, I mean, you generally don't have people arguing out in the world about family reunion dates. It's like they just meet on the date that somebody, whoever decides, the committee or whoever is hosting, and they just meet.
Mhm.
And it's like, because why? Because they want
Point
to
is
be
to
part
meet.
of the family and participate in the family
Mhm.
reunion. And I think that's a very similar way in which, like, we should be behaving. And if we're not, it seems insane. Because nobody trying to have a family reunion would be like, no, Thursday's not really Thursday, or
Well, that's another thing that not just the Torah
Yeah.
movement, but
True.
all of Christianity that I know is obsessed with sensational stuff and controversy. Like what's the latest new idea that everybody wants to talk about? As much as I think Jonathan Cahn has some really great teachings out there, everything that he teaches, all of his books are about the mystery of this and the secret of that. And it's like, I'm never going to read any of those books because I'm disgusted by this appeal to sensationalism.
It's the concept. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, because he's appealing to this urge within everybody to be special and know the stuff that nobody else knows. And we're supposed to be avoiding that. Paul tells Timothy, he gives him some orders. And he says, you charge them not to fight about this stuff, not to get caught up in these controversies. And you especially work to present yourself as an honorable workman, doing your job. You be more disciplined than anybody else. And I think, as we're working on building and, helping other fellowships grow and establish themselves, that's one of the things that we need to focus on, is that for the people attending this fellowship, you don't need to police everything that they believe. That's just not your business. You need to teach them, and you yourself need to be strict. Like we will
with
set
yourself. Yeah.
we will set stricter guidelines for elders than for anybody else. It's like this is the canon. These are the books we teach from. The rest of this stuff, the good historical references, maybe commentaries. Like we reference Tim Haig and Tom Bradford and Josephus and all of these other things, Yasher and Jubilees and Enoch. All of these things are extra biblical references that have varying degrees of value. And they're good for those kinds of purposes. But we don't use those as the basis for teaching. They're things that can add some insight, but they're commentary essentially, or at least that's.
And they're not authoritative.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's the idea of the canon is that this is the thing we use to measure everything else. Doesn't mean that there isn't inspiration and God doesn't speak through other means. This is just the measuring rod that we're going to use to measure all that stuff. And so the elders have to, walk this much narrower line. And just so that they can't tell other people, you have to avoid these controversies. You quit chasing all the sensational stuff if they're doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have no basis for helping other people.
Avoid those things.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's what I think Paul is trying to tell Timothy here. He's telling him, you have to order these people to be in line, which means you have to be more in line.
And I think that's true of leadership, like almost anywhere, because people will watch what you do and not what you say, right?
Mhm.
And so you can say all the things, and if you're not doing them, people will disrespect you, and people will not then follow your lead.
Yeah. There was one instance where there was a particular doctrine that all of the elders agreed, the Bible's okay with this particular behavior. Well, God allows this particular behavior, but they decided for our congregation, we are not allowing that. And I had a problem with that. It's like, well, where do you get off making rules that God doesn't? Well, 20 years later, I'm like, okay, I get it, because there's a matter of order. And we have different problems today than Paul was facing in the first century. He had to talk about, he had to give directions for Timothy in a city that was dominated by the cult of Artemis. Well, Brenham isn't dominated by the cult of Artemis. So some of the advice that Paul gave Timothy probably doesn't apply here. And we may have other things that we need to emphasize simply for the sake of order. Like, they never had to argue about the calendar. They never had to make rules like, which calendar are we going to follow? Because except for a few little fringe groups out in the desert and other places, all of the Jewish world was following the same calendar. They had a high priest, even if he wasn't after the order of Melchizedek, and he probably wasn't legitimate, but they had somebody in that office in Jerusalem. So they could say, well, the high priest says we're celebrating this feast on this day, so that's the day we're doing it, because that's the day that all the sacrifices are going to be made. So what's the point in doing it any other time? So they just never had to argue about that because it just wasn't an issue. But for us, we have to talk about that because we don't have a temple. We don't have an operating priesthood. We're not in Jerusalem, so we can't see the new moon from Jerusalem. We have to trust people if we're going to do that. So instead, we go by a calculated system that works for everybody across the entire globe. It works up in Alaska where they have sunlight for 3 months out of the year and they can't figure out what day is the Sabbath because what's a day? So there are things where you have to change and make rules for fellowship that aren't commandments from God. Like, we can't say God commanded this, so this is a sin. We can't do that. But we can say, well, in this fellowship, this is the way we're doing it, just for the sake of order. And I think that's appropriate as long as we're not becoming dictators and getting crazy
Or
about it.
making up our own new rules.
Yeah, or making
right?
up rules that just, well, this
That
is the way it's supposed to
contradict
be.
God's word. Yeah.
Yeah, I can come up with all kinds of things about eschatology and covenants and stuff that I think this is the way it is. But I'm not about to make rules. Everybody in our fellowship has to believe the same thing I do about it, because, as long as in the end you're behaving the same way and you're following God's commandments, okay, you're wrong. But
That's